The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
Welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those listening in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. I guess we will be having a new person in office here next week sometime. And we'll see how everything goes. We hope that it's peacefully done. And maybe people can actually get back on track, hopefully. With that said, though, tonight we got a great show lined up. So just remember, if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat or myself, and we will get those answered for you. And tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everybody. Is it wrong to say that it's 70 degrees here and sunny?
Yes, it is. Because it's snowing outside my window. And we have with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello. It's actually been really toasty yesterday and today, and they're talking about tomorrow as well.
Yeah, way to go, West Coast. That's all I can say. So,
I missed.
You do what?
I missed snow. I grew up in northern New Jersey, so, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I don't miss digging out of snowdrifts and trying to find a car.
And we've had nice dry snow, so you could shovel in like a t-shirt and jeans and not get cold.
Yeah, well, I spent 4 years in North Dakota, so I know what winter is like up there. You don't go out without anything on at all.
Goodness.
All right, with that, like I say, we got a great show lined up for tonight. And Jeff, why don't you introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Well, tonight we have multiple book authors, Gail Offen and John Milan. We'll be discussing tonight Michigan Haunts, Public Places, Eerie Spaces. And I actually not sure. I don't think I've been to Michigan yet, so I look forward to finding out what's what there. So welcome, Gail Offen and John Milan.
Well, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. It's actually Milan, and but I answer to just about anything.
Okay.
And I just like to add that it's 30 degrees here in Michigan. I just wanted to throw that in there, Barbara. Thank you.
That's right. It's a little frosty, but
our hearts are warm, and we're very excited to be on this show. Thank you for having us. We love to talk about things like Michigan haunts and haunted things in general, so we're very excited to be here, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the first thing we need to find out, because this book is just chock full of haunted places in Michigan, but you've got other books also, but has either or are either or both of you guys an investigator? Have you actually went out and did some paranormal research?
No, we always like to say in the beginning of our shows that, because we do presentations on all of our books, I always like to say the only equipment I own is maybe like a Cuisinart, and I don't think that's very helpful for finding ghosts. But we're very interested in other people that do. We don't want to come off as people who are ghost investigators, but because of this book, we've met so many people who are involved in the paranormal world, and it's fascinating for us. We're learning more and more, and so this book was a good introduction for us into the paranormal world.
I might also add, though, Henry, that and Gail will tell you as well, that my first experiences with this sort of thing was when I moved into a house that was definitely haunted, and then a friend of mine and I did a little bit of a house investigation in a notoriously haunted place So I've had a few experiences that kind of piqued my interest enough to get involved in the project.
Which
Okay, so we have to ask, did you investigate your own house and what was it haunted from?
Oh, this is a good one, folks.
Well, I did as much as I could, but it was a strange story. I had mentioned to a friend of mine that there were some strange things going on in the house. It was actually a two-story house with two flats, one on top of another. It was built about 1928. And the guy who lived upstairs from me, who was a great skeptic, I mean, there was just no question about it. But he came down and he said, "Hey, Milan," he goes, do you think maybe your house is haunted? And I'd lived there for about 2 months, and I'd realized there were a couple of strange things, but it never occurred to me until he mentioned that. And then, of course, everything became a lot more noticeable. So I did do a lot of investigation right there and then to see if we were imagining things or if that there was no logical explanation for the stuff. And that's kind of how it began, because I had a thought maybe there was something in the attic, like a rodent or something. So I actually called the company out to check out the attic and so forth, and they said, no, there's never been anything in here. It's the kind of insulation that changes color, when there are some kind of an infestation. So, everything we checked on, made it more and more clear that whatever was going on there was no logical explanation for. Now, at that point, go ahead.
Was it like knocking on the walls?
Yeah,
was it
on what the
whispering?
So it's a multitude of things. The first thing that startled me is I'd hear this banging coming from upstairs, and then my tenant told me that he kept waking up in the middle of the night and he'd run towards walk towards the bathroom, and something was pushing him over and knocking him on the floor. And at first I kind of laughed. I thought, well, maybe he had too many to drink, But a couple of times he woke up at 3 a.m. and the bathtub water in his flat was running at full blast, which makes no sense, of course. And it took 5 turns to turn it off. And at that point, I contacted a friend of mine, Gerald Hunter, who does a lot of ghost investigations. And he kind of walked us through some of the things to look out for. He said, well, is there any shampoo or soap on a rope? Could something have fallen on the faucet to make that happen? And of course, there was nothing. And it happened again and again. So, suddenly we're thinking, well, what in the world's going on here? Well, when my tenant wouldn't be there, I would hear footsteps and even running upstairs. And I'd go upstairs, and of course, there was nobody there. And so from one point to the next, it suddenly became far more apparent that things were going on. It was almost as if whatever was there wanted us to know it was there. So I contacted the owner of the house that I bought it from, and he had no idea why it would be like that. He'd had no experience like that, but he didn't know who owned it originally, and he wondered maybe if someone died there. He had no idea, So, but things kept going on in a very odd way, and whenever you try to, explain something away, something else would happen you couldn't explain. And I think the strangest thing that happened was one night I was on my way to watch my children across town, and I'd come in there from work, and I thought I probably ought to leave a light on, because by that time my tenant had moved out, not because of the haunting, but he'd moved away, and there was no one else in the house but me. And I thought maybe I should leave a light on, and I thought, I don't have time. And I got back to the house about 5 hours later. It was pitch black out, and every light in my house was on, not just in my flat, but the upstairs flat, the basement, and the external lights I had never turned on in my life were on, every single one of them. And it was as if whatever the entity was heard me in my mind say I should leave a light on, and then I'm not going to bother, because it was like, I'll show you, you know. and it took me a while to get up the nerve to go back in there after that, I'll tell you. But I guess anyone that's lived in a haunted house will tell you, you just get used to it. You know, it's almost like, unless it's something sinister, you almost laugh about it, you know. And there were many times when we would, you know, we'd hear this banging in the next room and we just laugh, you know.
Did you ever do research on the house to see if anything had happened there?
I did. I as I say, I talked to the guy who owned it. He had owned it since the 60s. Now, as I say, this house dated from 1928. He didn't have any records of the people that had bought it before him or who owned it before that. So it was really difficult to find out any information. Gerald Hunter said you might get a feeling about who you're dealing with. And I always got the sense that it was an elderly man. And it's funny, I play ragtime music, and my tenant said, maybe he likes the music you're playing, you know, because maybe it was somebody that died a long time ago. But I think one of the funnier stories is I had a band, and I was the only person that had the key to the house, and the drummer needed to get his drums to show up to a gig. And the drummer had no idea about what was going on in the house. He said, can I pick up my drums and meet you at the club? And I said, sure. I gave him the key. And he got to the club about 10 o'clock that night, and he said, boy, your tenant sure makes a lot of noise. And I said, what? He goes, he kept pounding on the floor when I was moving the drums. And I said, Brian, I don't have a tenant. He turned about 3 different shades of white. You know? So, you know, there's a lot of people were aware of it. So that was my experience with haunting in my own place, but it did interest me enough to try some other stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Well, at least if you could get them to pay rent, that would be,
That would have been nice, because the guy that moved out before didn't. So, you know.
Oh, well.
Ouch.
So when you guys were doing this book, doing research for the places, did you go out and look at any of the places?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we researched a lot of these places. We couldn't get to every single one of them, but we did get to a majority either separately or together. You know, we came up with this idea for this book. We did a book first on Grand River Avenue, which is a sort of Michigan's own Route 66. It goes from Detroit all the way westward across the state. And if you take, it goes all the way to Lake Michigan. If you take a car ferry to Milwaukee, you can take that same road all the way to Yellowstone. It's US 16. So it was fascinating to us that there is a road that literally starts in Detroit and goes all the way to Yellowstone, essentially. So we did a book on that. And along the way, a lot of people would tell us really interesting stories about some of the places, the haunted legends and things like that. And so we came up with this idea for this book, which there's no other book like this, in the sense that these are all public places with haunted legends that you can visit, because frequently when you hear these books about haunted places, they're always in someone's house. You can't go to knock on someone's door and go, let me see your haunted house. We want the book that had haunted places that you could visit. And this whole book is, there's a couple that you can't trespass inside, but 99% of these are places you can actually go in, because they're hotels, they're libraries, they're bars, they're museums, all kinds of places that you can actually visit and judge for yourself. One of them, and John has a great story about it, is an antique mall. It's haunted. So this was really fun. And as far as we know, this is the only book in the U.S. that has only places that are public.
Right. And Gail brings up a good point. You know, I just told you about the house I lived in. It's like, you know, people right away go, hey, where is it? But it's like, I sold the house. I wouldn't feel right giving the address out, because I'm sure, you know, So, a lot of these places are just private, and some of these places nobody wants you to really come looking around anyway,
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I was going to ask you, in researching these areas, are people, the owners of the stores, the bars, etc., are they open to paranormal investigations, or do you find them that they were kind of going, well, yeah, but we really don't want to talk about it?
Most places love the idea because it's good for business. In fact, John has a great story about the oldest dive bar, perhaps in the U.S., called the Two-Way Inn. And it's definitely the oldest one in Detroit, and they love it. And that's why people come there. In fact, there's tours that include that. Or, for example, there's this wonderful place called the Whitney that's owned by a lumber baron that was the first house in Detroit to have an elevator. And it would have cost $9 million to build today. It was $400,000 in 1895, which is incredible. So most of these places love the idea. We hardly encountered anybody who did not want to be featured in the book because it's good for business, right? So yeah, it's a good, it's a lot of people put things on their menu. For example, the Whitney, this restaurant and bar, they actually have their bar is called the Ghost Bar. And so, they actually have fun with that. And they have drinks named after the ghosts.
But as Gail says, there are a few places that don't want to talk about the ghosts. They're aware they're haunted. And one of them we'll probably mention later because Gail used to work there is a
Village and Henry Ford Museum.
Right. And they want to be looked at as a historical place, and they're very aware that the buildings are haunted, but they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, because it's educational. It's a very famous museum and grounds that Henry Ford started. It has Edison's laboratory in it. He actually moved the actual buildings from their original place, like Noah Webster's house. It's got Henry Ford's birthplace. It's a fascinating living history museum, but it's super haunted because I used to work there, and I have a few stories about that, but they don't want you to tell the patrons at all. You have to go up and ask somebody, and they can whisper in your ear, but they don't like you to talk about it.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. All right.
Very notorious.
Got a question from the chat room from Kat that said anything public in Southwest Michigan, especially southwest Michigan.
Well, there's a lot of things in southwest Michigan. The first thing that comes to mind is the Lighthouse in South Haven. And Gail talks a lot about that in our presentation. Was it a Civil War veteran, I think, wasn't it, Gail?
Yeah, Civil War veteran. It's amazing. There's this wonderful lighthouse that he used to have to light 3 or 4 times a day, and he had a wooden leg from the Civil War, and he would hobble out there, if you can imagine that, in all kinds of weather. Every lighthouse that we went to had a haunted story because these people would live in these places with very lonely lives. His name was James Donahue, and it was a 75-foot walkway. Think about that, with his wooden leg going out 3 or 4 times a day to keep the lighthouse lit. And they have a museum there now, and they can hear him upstairs walking around thumping his wooden leg. And, he lived there almost all of his life, and he now lives there as well. So that's a really interesting place in South Haven. There's also in Grand Rapids, we have quite a few locations as well, including the Pantlin Hotel, where one of the elevator operators accidentally got hung in the elevator, and the ghost of the elevator operators haunts that as well. And we have several places in Muskegon. There's the library is very haunted there by the man who started a lot of philanthropic things in town called Hackley. And I was telling Barbara earlier, there's a connection with Hackley with the show Confederate Gold, that it's said that Hackley helped launder some of the Confederate gold that they're searching for right now that ended up in a shipwreck as well. So there's quite a few. Our book actually has an index, and you can go. And so if you're going to Muskegon or Grand Rapids or Kalamazoo, we actually have an index, and you can throw the book in your glove compartment, we always like to say, and then whenever you're in one of these towns, what's the haunted place in this town?
Right. There's a couple of really interesting places way south in Michigan on the west side. A little town called Dowagiac has the Beckwith Theater, which a lot of the locals are aware of. It's a place where the local theater group does a lot of their productions and they do their rehearsals. And the uncanny thing about the Beckwith Theater is that if they're rehearsing or having activities upstairs, they'll hear groups singing and applauding in the basement, and vice versa. When they're in the basement, they'll hear groups applauding and singing upstairs, and the sound will just dissipate before they get there and check it out. And but they'll hear riotous, laughter and applause. And late at night, they've seen this waifish girl sleeping at the bottom of the fire escape, and then she just kind of disappears. So that's an interesting place to watch. Yeah, it's a small town.
It also has a haunted bookstore. It's one of our favorite haunted bookstores, John. Remember the Olympia?
That's
It's
right.
got a ghost who, he comes around, he puts books back in weird places, and then there's a chair that he drags around, and wherever they leave the chair, they'll find it in another place. They hear the ghost that lives in the bookstore dragging this chair around, trying to get a better view. So it's a fascinating little town.
Yeah, it really is. Talk about a town that time forgot. It's actually a beautiful place to visit. It really is. And but yeah, anywhere in. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a few places in the Southwest. There's actually quite a few, but go on.
Oh, the Henderson Castle in Kalamazoo, which is a lovely place, and you can stay there, and you can. I think you can even have banquets there. And what's the Felt Mansion? I think is out that way too, isn't it, Gail?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's a lot of notoriously haunted places in the southwestern side of the state.
So which
And it's amazing to me because in looking at the photographs, and the book is chock full of amazing photos of these locations, just how ornate some of the structures are, and the fact that people were building castles in the Midwest. Fascinating.
Well, there was a lot of lumber money, so we find that there's a lot of lumber barons. That place I told you about, the Whitney, he was a famous lumber baron. Michigan, was noted for a lot of timber. My favorite story about Henderson Castle is they have a ghost dog, and when it's a bed and breakfast, and when you sleep there, some nights you'll feel a dog crawling in with you, and you'll love that. If you're a dog lover, that's a good place to go.
Oh yeah. There's also a famous Kerwin Castle in Michigan, and Gail investigated that, but it was owned by a somewhat famous writer in the teens, in the 20s. And so, I think there was that interest in castle-like architecture in Michigan in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And some people didn't want to leave.
So which location seems to have the most paranormal activity?
That's a good question. Well, Detroit certainly has a lot. I don't think there's any one place. I think there's a lot more than we could possibly even fit in the book. In fact, there's so many places that when we've done these things in person or whatever, people come up and tell us about places that are in there. We may have to do another one. It feels like they're everywhere. It's so funny. They're everywhere that we just decided to visit. People would give us leads. We'd go there, and then people would tell us something else. That's what's so fascinating. They're everywhere.
Well, I know there's a lot of large places, and one of them is the Willow Lake State Hospital, also known as Northern Michigan Asylum, in Traverse City.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It looks huge. Are you able to actually investigate that place, or is it open or closed?
Yes, actually, I've been there, and it's interesting. They've actually turned that into a shopping mall and what's left of it, a shopping mall and a high-end restaurant, which is not what you see in most normal places and most of these kind of places, these asylums. And they still have the tunnels in there. They give tours. There's paranormal people that go and investigate, but it's become sort of a high-end tourist attraction, which is really very interesting for those places, because there's a place near me that, people are not even supposed to go to. And then there's another place where they took down the whole psychiatric facility near Howell, and they built a housing development over it. And it's incredibly haunted housing development. It's like poltergeist. People regularly see people with ropes around their necks and patients wandering around. But the one in Traverse City is beautiful. And it was a fascinating place because it was one of the few places that believed in beauty and artwork and music to try and heal the patients, as opposed to keeping them chained up and being a place of horrors. So they tend to think the ghosts there are happier ghosts than most asylums because the patients were so happy. And I find that fascinating.
Wow.
But of course, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that seems to be the rule of thumb, though. Places that were used for treating, mental patients or prisons. These are places that are very frequently notoriously haunted. So,
in a bad way. Yeah. But we highly recommend, if people come to Michigan, the prettiest part of Michigan, and Michigan's really beautiful. Sure, the Traverse City area is really one of the most beautiful places year round. So it's definitely, if you're going to come to Michigan, that's one of the places you should go, and you should definitely go and see that former asylum.
Wow.
Sounds neat. You have also Battle Creek, Michigan, which would have the Kellogg. Wasn't there a sanitarium that he had there as well?
Yes, and some of that is still there. Most of that's not open to the public anymore.
Right.
Unfortunately, the cereal industry moved a lot of their manufacturing operation out of the country. And so we couldn't really include a lot of that in there, because to get into those structures, you would need permission. That was kind of part of the process of what do we eliminate, what do we include.
Red tape. We don't want anything red tape. So
no red tape. But one thing I grew up near, and it's pretty famous, was called Eloise, and Eloise Sanitarium was over 900 acres in size, with 75 buildings, and it actually was one of the trendsetters in psychiatric treatment. But it was a nightmarish place in the 19th century, and what's left of it, I think, what are they doing with that, Gail? Are they making a hotel?
It's fascinating for your show, and maybe you can have people from there. Somebody bought it, and they're turning it into a, quote, paranormal hotel. The decor is going to be from the 30s, and because it's such a haunted place, they're going to make a hotel out of it and have people from all over the world come and do investigations and stay there. Now, COVID, I think, put a bit of a halt on their plans, but they were giving tours of this asylum in the fall, and they were sold out all the time. The tours are $60 and $60 to $100, and they were selling out tours. So this is literally the most famous and haunted asylum in Michigan. It's a very well-known place. Books have been written about it. It's called Eloise.
Well, when they first started that, didn't it develop so large that it was incorporated into its own city?
That's correct, Henry. Very good. It was, it started as the Detroit Poorhouse, and, basically it was a place in the 1830s they'd throw anybody who was undesirable. But they said, well, let's move it out. And basically they moved it about 30 miles out of town, and it was the wilderness in 1839, right? And as you say, it just kept growing and growing and growing, because, I guess you can never run, there's no end to how many people you want to put away, I guess. But it eventually became the city of Eloise. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you went out on Google right now and said Eloise, Michigan, it would still identify it as a city, even though so it was massive.
It had its own farm, its dairy, and if you even go on eBay occasionally, and they're very expensive, they made shoes there, and you can find Eloise shoes made by the inmates there.
Wow.
And it has its own cemetery.
Yes, it does. You were talking about personal experiences, and in our book, Michigan Haunts, you'll see the only ghost photograph I've ever taken, and it was unintentional, but it was taken there on the grounds of Eloise. I was taking photographs of the grounds, and some of the buildings have been demolished. And I was taking pictures of some of the mounds and the fencing. And when I got my photos back, these were all 35 millimeter, there was one photo with something strange behind the fence, and I enlarged it. And if you look in the book, and it might be in our Facebook page too, I'm not sure, Gail, but you can see it looks like a woman in a long black dress and a hat looking out from the fence at me. And there was no one there that I could see when I was taking this picture. So it's not unusual for people to see all kinds of strange things on the grounds of the Eloise Asylum.
I do see it. And you didn't even have to circle it in the photograph, as some people try to do to see. Do you see it now?
Oh, yeah.
It's very obvious. Yeah.
It's hard on an audio show but we sort of described it. Yeah.
It was definitely a chilling picture, and I went there the next day to see, well, maybe it was something else, and there was nothing there that it could have been. It was, I think Gerald Hunter explained it to me. He said, a lot of times you see things that the film catches that you don't see, and apparently that was one of those instances. But you mentioned the graveyard as well, and there's over 7,000 graves across the street with just numbers on the stones, because these were the unclaimed dead from the asylum, and no one would pay for the burial. And now, the place has been closed for about 40 years, and they don't even have the records of who's in there. It's pretty sad.
Numbers. There's just numbers on the graves, and that's one of the saddest things in the book. The book has a lot of funny. The book, if you read it, it's got a lot of funny stuff in it as well. But that's a very sad thing.
Yeah.
Unclaimed people.
Yeah.
You got some feedback. Is your mic real close to you?
No, actually, it's not. Okay, that's better. I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
All right, no problem.
It was a ghost.
Now,
we haven't even started playing guitar yet. I don't know.
You had a lot of interesting stories too. I like the one on page 35 about the Walker Tavern.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was
that's an interesting place because it was a very famous place that James Fenimore Cooper stayed. There was a stagecoach stop in the Irish Hills, and John has a lot of stories about the Irish Hills, which is a sort of a very pretty part of Michigan, and a lot of people used to vacation there. But in our presentation, this is not in our book, but we have this great slide of this. They used to have this attraction in there called the Murder Room. And what it was, it would charge you 25 cents. This is before the internet, folks, so this is what passed as entertainment. There was a man there who played cards. He was staying at the tavern, and it was also a hotel. This place is still around, the Walker Tavern. I mean, it's from the 1800s, and and so this man named Hipsley was playing cards, and he went upstairs, and the next day his horse was found down the road, and there was a big blood stain next to his bed, and he was gone. And instead of cleaning up the place and whatever, they decided to leave everything the way it was. And so for 25 cents, you could go up and see where this guy was murdered. And we have a picture postcard in our presentations, not in the book, unfortunately, that shows what it looked like. And people could go in there, see the blood stains, see the cards and the bed where the guy was murdered.
Did they ever find his body?
No. And it's interesting, though, a few years ago, one of the docents that works there reported that a man showed up from Ohio, and he said that he had heard his great-great-uncle had been murdered there, and he identified the man as a man named Hipsley. And when somebody was doing a paranormal investigation, they heard the name, they said, who was murdered here? And that was the name that they heard on tape answer. It was the same name, Hipsley.
Wow.
Very strange, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those unsolved mysteries from the 1840s, I guess, you know.
And we found a picture that's, again, in one of our presentations that we do, where a guy set up a camera, right, John, in the Walker Tavern and caught a lot of activity.
Right, a lot of movement. You know, obviously, it's a very actively haunted place. And that whole area, as Gail said, there's a lot of, you know, the Native Americans considered it an enchanted region. I guess we don't really know what makes certain areas more active than others, but that one seems to be pretty active.
I would say the Irish Hills is one of the most haunted places in Michigan because we found so many weird places that had a lot of legends.
Well, didn't that Walker guy build another building right across the road from him?
Yes, he built the Brick Walker Tavern, which was much larger. And, you know, fortunately, both of these structures are still standing, and they're both part of the tour, but the original tavern is a National Historic Site. And just as a matter of putting it, you know, in a place in your mind, this is just about a mile from the Michigan International Speedway. So if you're ever going in that direction, it's a great place to stop by and take a look at, and it just happens to be haunted.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't know where that was.
The MIS, yeah. They make more noise than the ghosts, I think. But
yeah, I lived in Daytona Beach for a while, so I know about that.
Yeah, good so.
One of my aunts used to work out at the Speedway, and I guess I could have probably got in there for free if I'd have wanted to, but I was too busy running around at that time. And then I joined the Air Force in '66, so I never did go back there to live.
You know your way around a speedway if you lived in Daytona, so.
Yeah, I was more into the drag racing part.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there was Milan Dragway, believe it or not. No relation to John, but in Michigan they had Milan Dragway.
Wow.
Big Daddy John Garlitz and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Now, you had a story in there that I thought was pretty interesting. The Bowers Harbor Inn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the story of Genevieve.
Genevieve Stickney, yeah, that's a very popular one. Again, that's in that northern beautiful part of Michigan near Traverse City. The Bowers Harbor Inn. Genevieve Stickney and her husband, they had an orchard, and they would make jam out of their fruit. And Genevieve liked to partake of her wares a little bit too much because eventually she was unable to walk up the stairs. She had a lot of health problems. And her husband actually put in an elevator, and he hired a nurse to take care of her. And one thing led to another, this beautiful nurse. And when her husband passed away, he had left his entire fortune to the nurse. And Genevieve was so distraught that she hung herself there's another example of hanging herself in the elevator. Well, now, years later, it turned into this bed and breakfast called the Bowers Harbor Inn, and people would report that they would hear the elevator going, even though the elevator had been deactivated years ago, and there was no electricity connecting the elevator. And so, but people would hear the elevator turning on. They reported seeing it going up and down as if Genevieve was there. And then ladies would go into the first floor ladies' room, and they'd be at the mirror fixing their hair, and they'd look up and they'd see a woman in period costume looking back at them, which people do believe it's Genevieve still keeping her eyes on her property. and that's a very notorious Northern Michigan legend, and it's one of many that we discovered. We call it the jealous wife ghost. There's several examples of women who are very angry at their husbands for doing whatever they did, and haunt them even in the afterlife. Sorry.
Let that be a lesson to men everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But the elevator, people still to this day, it's still a restaurant, this beautiful inn, and people still hear the elevator going.
You had one in there that I've heard of lots of times before, being into paranormal, and it's called the Paulding Light.
Oh, yes.
Now, yeah, I know pretty much about the story. However, it's supposed to have been a brakeman that got killed. But did they ever do research to see if there was a train wreck at that particular place?
I don't know that they ever were able to pinpoint who would have been the so-called phantom brakeman there. But there had been some railroad disasters in the area, as you would imagine, over the years, especially that's, in the mining region of Michigan. But it was one of those things where they didn't know what to attribute it to, because, it's a series of lights, or a light that kind of comes up the road towards you, and it hovers over your head and then disappears, and it changes colors. So I think the thing that came to their mind was, oh, this is like the lantern of a phantom brakeman.
There seems to be light anomaly stories like that in lots of different places.
Yes.
There was one. I lived in Wilmington, North Carolina for about 20 years, and just south of Wilmington, there was a little town called Mako, where the same thing happened. A brakeman was trying to stop a train, and it hit him. Well, now you see a light come swinging down the tracks right up to the intersection there where the road crosses the track, and it would go out. And they had researched it, and they never could figure out what it was. And there was a light in, when I lived in Daytona, there was a place called Tomoka State Park. There was lights out there. It was like 3 miles from the last street light to the last street light to the park entrance. And you're supposed to drive up and down this little 2-lane road with swamp on each side, flash the lights off and on, and this light will come out either in front of you or behind you and comes up to you, changes colors and shapes, and goes out and comes on in front of you. A lot of people have been killed chasing that thing or being chased by it out there. So there is different stories of light anomalies that most of the time they can't explain.
But the best part of this one is, this is one of the few that you could win money, and this is what we always tell the people in our presentations. First of all, it's the only mysterious light that's authorized by the National Park Service. We have a picture in our book. They actually have Casper, a little picture of Casper on there. And Ripley's, believe it or not, the offer's still good, folks. They're offering $100,000 if you can prove what causes the Paulding lights. And so we always tell people, whoever's in our audience, we always go, hey, let's get in a van and just drive up there. By the way, it takes 12 hours to get up there. Let's go up, we'll just split the money. I mean, $100,000 between whoever's in the audience, that's a pretty good payday. Let's go solve it. Come on, there's money to be made.
Is that in a swampy area, or what's the area itself like?
It's mostly forest, and it's very old mountain range called the Porcupine Mountain Range there. Gail brings up a good point. Michigan is a very large and state with 2 peninsulas, so you could virtually get to North Carolina from Detroit in the same amount of time it would take us to get to that place in the state of Michigan. Wow. But it's a very it's an old mountain range, and it's very hilly and old forest, old pine forest. but I wouldn't say swampy. That's copper country up there, and iron, and there's a big history of the mining industry up that way.
And it's interesting because that was all glacial formed, correct? A lot of the
absolutely. In fact, Michigan is just covered in lakes, and of course surrounded by the Great Lakes because of the glaciers, and you can see that even down here in the southern end of the state, where the topography is what we call Mississippian. It's very hilly.
Extremely, yeah. I notice you don't get into cryptids very much in the book, but it seems to me that there's an awful lot of caves and whatnot that people could get lost in, especially Bigfoot.
Well, that's interesting. A lot of the caves that I'm familiar with are more in Henry's region down in Ohio. I mean, there are a few caves. I think there's a couple on Mackinac Island in the limestone formations, but some of the more well-known caves, I think they're down in Henry's region and in Kentucky, but there's some strange formations here, definitely in the lakes and so forth.
Oh, yeah. I can never pronounce the name of that island. Mackinac?
Yeah,
Mackinac, right.
Mackinac, okay. Yeah, that has some really wild, that has the arch on it. Didn't somebody jump from that?
Yes, there's a legend. It's a Native American legend about a Native American maiden who her parents didn't approve of her boyfriend, which, continues to this day. And she was so despondent that she jumped from this rock, and then she put a curse on the island. And for people who live in Michigan, we've sort of put a joke in there where when you go on this island, the big thing to do for some reason is to buy fudge. Every place sells fudge. So the big curse on the island was everybody was doomed to gain 10 pounds by eating fudge. But, it's just it's called the Arch Rock. And it was, and then also, though, interesting on Mackinac Island, there's one thing that people don't realize. There was a place where women, it was called the Drowning Pool, where women were thrown in that were accused of being witches. I know you've had a lot of shows about witches, which I found fascinating. And of course, back then, they would, if you were accused of being a witch, they would throw you in this drowning pool. And if you weren't a witch, you would drown. But if you were, if you were a witch, you would drown. Wait, I have it wrong.
You were dead either way, basically.
Now, if you were alive, you were accused of being a witch. If you drowned, you weren't a witch, but you were dead. So sorry. I usually tell that better. Apologies.
No, I think that was great. Actually,
it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of thing.
Pretty much,
yeah.
Now, why fudge? I can understand that there was a lot of cornfields around where Kellogg's could get and make cornflakes, but I'm not sure why the fudge came to be.
It's a place you can only reach by boat, and there's no cars allowed on the island. It's horse and buggy. So it's a very interesting sort of a time forgot kind of place. And somebody was a fudge manufacturer in the 1800s, and then it was like an arms race that other people wanted to have fudge, and then it just became this place that everybody, it's like against the law not to eat fudge there. So there's very little to do there, and eating fudge is really one of the spectator sports.
It sounds like a nice place to go. Yeah,
it is. It's actually beautiful.
Yeah, the hotel there, the Grand Hotel, if anyone has, which is, by the way, very haunted also, and it's featured prominently in
Somewhere in Time.
Somewhere in Time. And
even Jane Seymour was shot.
Yep. And I think it's also Neptune's Daughter it's featured in, which is a much older film, but that was built there in the 1880s, and so that's always been a tourist attraction, even in the 19th century. And I imagine fudge was a popular treat to make up there, for tourists, and remains so today. It's a pretty darn expensive place to visit, but it's very pretty.
Wow. Well, is that closed like in the wintertime because it gets too cold and snowy and icy?
Well, they have snowmobilers. That's another thing to do up there, so people can go across the frozen water on snowmobiles. But it's really hardly anybody's there in the winter. It's a summer town, and people go over on boats in the summer. It's really one of Michigan's top tourist attractions. It's really a beautiful place, and it's just nice to be able to stroll around and not worry about cars and go places with horse and buggy. It's really quaint, and it's actually really beautiful.
And Gail made a good point. That's the only highway in Michigan where automobiles are not allowed at all. So there you go.
Now,
put that in your pocket.
I believe I seen somewhere like the Ford Museum is huge, and they don't allow you to drive around in there. Don't you have to park and either walk or ride a bike or something?
You can ride their Model Ts, or they'll put you in a horse and buggy, but you can't drive in there at all. That's the village that Gail was talking about with all the historic structures, and she was a tour guide there. But it covers several square miles, doesn't it, Gail?
Yeah, it's a very big place. And again, it's got, places from all over the country, historic places. It's so accurate that Henry Ford had the yard of Edison's, where his house was, he had the dirt dug up, and the front yard is actually the dirt from Menlo Park in New Jersey. That's that accurate. He even has Edison's last breath there. He was obsessed with Edison, and so everything is so historically accurate throughout Greenfield Village. It's really an incredible place. If anybody comes to Michigan, if you like history, this is the place. And if you also like haunted things, it's also the place, because Henry Ford himself haunts his birthplace. And when I would be a tour guide there and we'd be in different houses every day, you'd look over sometimes and the spinning wheel would be going, the rocking chair would be rocking. Sometimes his books would move. And we were used to it because, if Henry Ford was going to go somewhere, why not go to his boyhood home? He was certainly welcome.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So did he move the house to the factory? I know some people dismantle buildings and move them intact. Is that what happened? Or did he build the factory around his house?
John, how did he move the things? Do you know?
Yeah, well, the factory, the original factory was in Highland Park. By the time he had a factory in that area, it was not right there. There was a large, a bunch of facilities around it. But he moved his boyhood home there, as you suggested. What they would do is they would dismantle it and number it, and he would have experts completely rebuild it, with all the original materials. And he made a lot of enemies. This was kind of his little playland, because he would take, like a courthouse from where Lincoln was practicing law in Illinois, and it would be gone in the middle of the night, basically. And Henry Ford was taking it to Dearborn, Michigan, and I don't know, like Gail said, Noah Webster's house, and he would take the Wright brothers' family home from Dayton, Ohio, and they would be all reconstructed there using this numbered process, so that they would put them back together exactly as they had been where they had stood originally.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's kind of an industrial Willy Wonka.
Exactly. Yeah. And he was a strange character. I mean, let's not, I don't think there's any getting around it. That was kind of his playhouse, for a long time. It was not really open to the public until the 30s, and then it was used as an educational facility more than a tourist place initially, But as Gail said, if you come to Michigan, you have to see it. It's just wonderful,
Plus the museum, that's a whole separate thing, if you're a car lover, it has so many cars. It's just incredible.
Right.
And locomotives and all kinds of things.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of like the Edison Institute. Like the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. It's that large, and yeah. But
And it sounds like an engineer's a dream to be able to go through there.
Yes. And even they have the Wright brothers boyhood home, which is also very haunted. That's one of the most haunted places there. There's stories of we'd be guides in there, and we'd leave the house to go get lunch or whatever, and the house would lock from the inside and no one could get in, and no one was in the house.
Wow.
So we'd have to go and get keys to open the house, even though nobody was in there. And people regularly would see figures going up we'd say to somebody, don't go, sir, you can't go up the stairs. And then that person would fade away. That is considered a very haunted place. And the Wright brothers never married. And they were sort of very strange people. They also have their bicycle shop there as well. Okay. So that's another fascinating place, but very haunted.
But anything to do with the Industrial Revolution and the 20th century invention, as Gail says, the Wright brothers, the Firestone Farm, which is, Harvey Firestone's farm is there, and that's pretty haunted too, I think. Was it his daughter that haunts the place, Gail?
Right. She's upstairs rearranging the furniture, and that's a funny ghost. That's the other thing. People need to have a sense of humor about certain ghosts. So when we give presentations, we always talk about the different ghosts. The jealous wife ghost. The Sally Firestone ghost we call her the coffee drinking ghost, because as guides there, for some reason, if you'd be in that house and you put down your cup of coffee, all of a sudden your coffee would be gone. And so we just found that very odd. That was the only place that ever happened. So we just decided Sally was a real caffeineaholic. And that was, so that's, it's just kind of funny to think there's ghosts with little funny different habits.
Oh, I find that totally not unusual, because when I go in, I'm going to haunt a coffee shop because I drink a ton of the stuff.
She wasn't real picky either. It's not like she, picked Starbucks over anything else. She'd take any coffee she could get, but regularly people will look upstairs, they'll see her face, and sometimes you would hear upstairs furniture being moved around. You go upstairs and the furniture would be in a different place. And again, you have to have respect for these people. These are their homes. We're not trying to disturb them. They're just trying to more or less live, even if they're not alive.
Well, it's also interesting that here's highly inventive people, very technical people. So, the abstract thinking that they would have had to have had was amazing. It would seem almost normal that they would come back if they could.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Gail kind of drives it home when we do our presentation. You probably saw at the end of the book, probably the most famous person who was close to the haunting or the haunting and the paranormal was Houdini, who ended up dying in Detroit. And they've been trying to conjure him up from the dead for about 90 years now.
Maybe he likes sleeping. All right.
Yeah, I forgot about that. It was Halloween in Detroit, right?
Oh, yes. We'd love to talk about Houdini because he died on Halloween 1926. And for 10 years, his wife would come to Detroit and hold a seance to try and contact him. And then after 10 years, she said, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. And she stopped. It's true. And she stopped coming, although magicians come from all over the world to Detroit on Halloween every year to hold a seance to try and get in contact with Houdini.
Wow.
I don't think just keep going to the wrong place.
Well, they
all that he was. We make that very clear. He did not believe in spiritualists or spirits.
Oh.
He spent a lot of time debunking it.
He makes James Randi look like a believer.
Exactly.
Wow.
When we were doing the book, we visited the Majestic Theater, which was one of the theaters that Houdini would regularly appear at. And it's still there. It's a beautiful theater, just been recently restored. And the owner told us that, just a few weeks before, they had a seance out on John R. Street. That's one of the major streets in Detroit to bring Houdini back. So, they're still at it, There's just somebody's trying to get Harry back somehow.
Well, it's interesting that because the story goes, doesn't it, that he dared a college student to punch him in the stomach.
Well, the actual story, and I just heard a wonderful lecture with a scholar of Houdini. The actual story is he was in Montreal, and he would do a thing where someone would punch him in the stomach, but he always had a warning of it. So he would tighten his stomach in a certain way and say, "Punch me now." And he knew how to hold his stomach in a certain way that he would never get injured. But some college kid came up to him and just punched him in the stomach without giving him proper warning. And an infection started, peritonitis. It started in Montreal, and by the time Houdini came to Detroit 4 days later by train, he already had a temperature of 104. Now the show must go on, and he went and did his show, but he was rushed to the hospital after the show because his fever had spiked so high, and then he ended up dying in the hospital. We have a picture of it in the book. It looks like a haunted house itself in the hospital. Yeah. And then he was laid out in another mortuary nearby, which is still standing, and turned into a music school where people would report seeing Houdini a lot because that's where his body was laid out. And that place still exists, although it's been abandoned.
Wow.
It'd be interesting to know if the ghost of the guy who punched him ever shows up every now and then.
Yeah, it's very controversial because some scholar was saying that some people thought he was put up to do it by a rival magician. There's some writing about that where someone who was jealous of him paid this student to go up and punch him. So it's sort of shrouded in mystery like everything else. But I do want to add that the magic capital of the world, believe it or not, is in Colon, Michigan, the unfortunate name of Colon, Michigan. And it literally is the magic capital of the world. It has the Abbott Magic Company, and it's magicians, again, they come that's another place they go on Houdini's death. They do seances there. So if you look it up, folks, believe it or not, Colon, Michigan is the magic capital of the world.
Right. Actually, most magicians are buried there too. They request that they be interred in Colon. So
really,
it became the place. I found this out recently. Blackstone, the very famous magician, and his son Blackstone Jr., they owned property up near Colon, and they decided that they were going to go up there and live there and make that the magic capital. And other magicians came there, and they started the Abbott Magic Company, which was considered the premier maker of tricks, and that's how it all started, was because of Blackstone.
Huh.
Wow. Well, that goes on the tour list.
Oh my gosh, if you guys ever come to Michigan, please reach out to us. We could give you such a tour, and we could tell you places to go. We're big Michigan. All of our 5 books are about Michigan, so we've got it in restaurants, haunted places, everything.
Wow. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and take our break.
Okay.
Just remember the mics will be live, so don't say anything or else mute your mic either way. And it'll be about 6-7 minutes, something like that, and you'll hear me when we come back on.
Okay.
All right, so Jeff, you want to take us out? Jeff, is he still here? All right.
I thought he was. Oh, there it goes.
Oh,
okay.
there you go.
It just went silent for a second. I'm like, oh, don't tell me I fell off now. Skype's and it's great timing. Well, you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat, Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with our guest authors tonight, Gail Offen and John Milan. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.